All right, welcome to an episode of GTR, Google Trends Investing, with myself, Nolan Antonucci. Since I've last recorded one of these, a few things have changed in my life. I now work for the pet retailer, Chewy. So I've transitioned from the agency world to working for one of the largest publicly traded e-commerce entities. So, but a lot of what I'm doing is still the same. I still have my largest position, or it was up until the past week, Shopify. So again, I still very much believe in the long-term trajectory of direct-to-consumer e-commerce being consumed by Shopify. And again, I will go through a number of charts here. Also kind of going into NVDA, because NVDA ends up being somewhat existential both to my job in many ways in terms of acquiring search volume for, as it is now, for Chewy, or whether in the past for agencies. But I do believe that more and more of the queries that people turn to Google to find answers for are going to be asked more directly to some form of AI, whether it's Perplexity or ChatGPT or Claude 3 or whatever's out there. There's going to be more and more is going to be eaten by that, whether open source or otherwise. So I do, again, this NVIDIA position is now 3x'd in probably about a year. It's probably been a little more than that, but I do wish, whether it was the inception moment of December with ChatGPT 3 being launched, or I think it's 3.5 being launched, and kind of the awake, again, I just remember during Christmas break at that point being like, wow, this is going to change so much. And I do wish I'd spent a little more time, stuck to my my process and figured out a little bit more of how clear it was that NVIDIA was going to be at least the beneficiary in the short term. And again, the question ends up being the long term. So even here at the end of my post here is, if you're trimming, liquidating, holding, scaling, actively betting against, taking a position I could add, selling it all, or shorting against it, I honestly understand. Because the price movement has been so all over the place, but taking a step out of price movement, it's not the core element of what I'm trading on. Is I'm really trying to see, is there a way in which, when growth is so large, whether it's something like Shopify as kind of one position I started here, or whether it is Monster Energy Drink, or Disney Plus, or even the iPhone, I do believe that there are search volumes that do correlate with certain phases of consideration for a product or a service that a company has, that you can eventually translate those into Google Trends charts to get a read, and whether that read is relative to competitors, whether that read is relative to itself, because even in this day and age where I think we're going to see more and more of the search volume leaving Google as a percentage, and some of those searches are going to wind up as what's the best e-commerce site for headless commerce, and you're going to query Claude 3 or ChatGPT 4 or 5 and ask those questions, and those will be taken away and drawn out of what is on Google at present. But jumping in here, as far as what I have, there's been a number of cleanup done here, and this was an inspiration from, I call my friend, we've met in person, Alex, ticker symbol U. Again, he's been heavy in showing the science behind the stocks. So the actual, kind of what is behind NVIDIA beyond just buzz and AI, what is actually in there. And there was the post that he shared in terms of what is kind of some of these words and things to be looking out for that are coming. Let's see if I can go to the next slide here. You can hear my son in the background. We only posted the two videos, the two pics, but in his he did include these things that are on the ramp for NVIDIA in terms of the H200, the GH200, the B100, NVIDIA. Again, this ends up, the green ones are being kind of adding them all up together, and you can see when you add up all these ones, it is still the demand for this next generation of products that they have is climbing. To a degree where we'll see where it goes from here, but it is definitely eye-opening numbers. And again, you can play around with the charts as I have here and take a look at them directly. So some of these ones, like P100, H100, require a lot of cleanup. So I've excluded some other terms that have an H100 terms in there. And so it ends up being not as perfect, but you can still see from this relative, you've created you kind of teared it out. I was a cashier register where you kind of remove the weight of the actual container. You can now kind of get an understanding, okay, here was the baseline for H200, and then you can see what this climbing is from there. You can now get a sense from where this base was to where it is there, how much relative for the B100 has climbed, or H100 in blue, how much that has climbed, and then you add them all up in here, and you get the green one that ends up, this is all those queries plus the word NVIDIA, so obviously these are very kind of, the confidence that one of these queries is NVIDIA related is 100% because they'll have the word NVIDIA. But this is something that, again, taking a step back in terms of whether this applies for NVIDIA, whether this applies for Shopify. And here is what I would say is kind of like my genesis kind of realization, where I was at a conference for e-commerce retailers in Chicago, And it was pretty clear that the cool kid, the cool booth was Shopify and Magento and BigCommerce and others. WooCommerce were kind of the old kids on the block that weren't so cool, and we're going to be facing a trajectory that Shopify had in blue, that Magento versus, so queries that you're weighing, what are the benefits of Shopify versus Magento, or Magento versus WooCommerce, or these things you're deciding. They had Shopify in that query much more often than they had Magento. So that's taking this instance of when you're weighing what are the pros and cons of these different e-commerce platforms. And that decision-making process, wherever, it wasn't 100% of the chance that would resolve in somebody deciding with Shopify, but there was some ratio there that probably could be consistently tracked over time. So as that climbs, you could see in some ways a glimpse in terms of how is Shopify winning business in this space. And again, you can take other queries that correlate directly with like pricing or the different plan options you have, or Shopify Plus being this for more enterprise-level merchants. But there's a number of things you can do to layer this in, and then I've used this as my North Star, and honestly, another one where I could say I regret, in some regards, I wish I had adhered to this more, is Celsius energy drinks, which has gotten very popular. It's kind of a more healthier energy drink. But it was pretty clear that Monster and the word caffeine, like the caffeine content in this Monster, has been climbing for years. When I go back to when I was in college here in 2009, 2008, to date myself pretty good there, it was climbing at that point in time, and if I had Google Trends up, I would have seen it, and there's this pullback, and I actually think it did correlate with the stock pulling back, but then they've gone on this multi-year ramp where there is, Monster has been one of the biggest earners, or biggest gainers in this last 15-year cycle here, but Celsius, I mean, it's pretty incredible and remarkable what they've kind of done as well, and you can see now they're getting close to it. They've now eclipsed Red Bull, and not nearing parity with Monster in the U.S., and this is going to become eventually an international battlefield where they're going to try to win share with the help of their agreement with Pepsi on the climb there. So it's been a long time since I've chatted, but I wanted to just kind of have a chance to hear. I guess I had this other plan to go on iPhone support as well. I mean, you can see here Apple support, iPhone support, climbing. There gets to be a point of desaturation where you now have one market and people looking for support. Like in the sense of being very like looking in the hindsight, but it's still going to be relative to know like what's going on here. And people don't, again, I have a Google Pixel phone. My wife gives me a hard time about it. And people don't really search Android support, but it still is a relative number. You can see this thing really kind of plateaued or peaked, I guess, here in December of 11, and maybe kind of stayed for until 2014, but then quite clearly went on a downslope. And you could go this country by country because Apple is still winning share globally. But again, I do kind of challenge, and feel free to challenge me if there is, if there is some element of a buying process to the product. And I know some of these pharmaceutical companies and things like that require breakthroughs do not match up with this as well, but I think I've been successful with using Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk to understand Ozempic and other queries. And what's the other one? Mojarno or whatever it is there. But there is, and you could just say weight loss, diabetes medication, or things like that. There ends up being ways you can kind of correlate these with search volume. So it's been a while since I've done one of these, a little rusty, but let the trend be your friend, and hopefully I'll hear back from you guys in the comments on your thoughts, and reach out to me on Twitter, and yes, on the Dumb Money community there. Thank you, guys.